Every single time I want to record a video, one of my neighbours is using some piece of electrical machinery out in their garden. It's been hammering down with rain today, and as soon as all of the parts arrived for this system and I'd begun setting things up ready to record, the sun came out, the rain dried up, and everyone started making a noise in their garden. So I am so sorry for the background noise if you can hear it in this video, folks, but we're not going to let that stop us making an awesome little video. So after a quick reduction in clothing because it's boiling in here, let's dive straight into this video. Today we are going to be building a brand spanking new PC for my sister and her husband. At the moment they are using a laptop which is a good few years old, I think, at this point. As far as I'm aware, it's really slow and sluggish, and they want a nice upgrade, a system that is going to be fast, stable, reliable, and hopefully last a good few years. So what I have done is I've spec'd out and ordered the parts for a really nice system that I personally believe is going to carry them through and be a very smooth running computer for the next good few years. So without further ado, this is not a gaming build or anything like that. This is just your everyday PC built for normal things, you know, web browsing, storing files, doing stuff with photos, music, YouTube, some stuff with DVDs, you know, just normal everyday stuff. This is a nice basic computer, but it's quality at every level, at least in my opinion. So let's take a little look at the parts and see what we're going to be building with today. This is definitely one of my favourite parts about building any PC, and that's when you lay everything out in front of you, you can see everything, it's all brand new, waiting to be built. So let's dig in and talk about each individual component. I'm going to try and access all areas of my brain so I remember what the heck I'm talking about. So first up, we have got the CPU. Let's talk about the brains of the operation. I have gone with an Intel platform this time. We're going to be using the Intel Pentium G4560, which I'm surprisingly excited about. This is a nice little CPU. It's a dual core CPU, but it does have hyperthreading, which is awesome. So 2 cores, 4 threads. It runs at 3.5 gigahertz, and of course it's a very new chip. It's a Kaby Lake CPU. It was released Q1 of 2017, I believe, so we're building a very up-to-date platform here, which is nice, going to be good for a good few years. And the 4560, I think it's going to really allow for some growing room. I could have stepped down another couple of notches and shaved off some pricing, but I think this will be great for a good few years and give plenty of breathing room for everyday tasks. I'm looking forward to seeing what this guy can do. I've been impressed by some of the benchmarks and whatnot I've seen online. Of course, I've tried to do my best with research because I don't have the luxury of building systems all the time. If I get to build one system a year, then that's good going. So it's kind of hard to keep my own personal log of how the CPUs are performing and whatnot. So I've tried to do the best research I can, and I honestly believe that I have made a good decision, but we will see when the system is put together. So nice little Pentium, dual core, 3.5 gigahertz, lovely stuff. That is going to be the heart and soul of our system. Next up is the motherboard. Now here is where I saved a lot of money. They didn't need a lot of the features that were on the higher end boards. So there are, I think, 4 or 5 B250 M80X boards from Gigabyte. This is the lowest end one, and you sacrifice things like Wi-Fi and you sacrifice M.2 slots and things like that and more RAM slots, but I do think that this will be an ideal board for them. We will look closer at it when we unwrap it, and I'll give you a little tour around and show you all of the bits and bobs and show you some of the features that maybe you don't get on a lower end board like this. But for around 50 quid, you can't grumble. You're getting a quality Gigabyte ultra durable board that supports your CPU and your RAM and just does everything that you need a basic board to do in a basic system. Of course, you don't get all of the frills and bells and whistles, but for this build, we just don't need it. So I'm really hoping that that board is going to be great. I've gone to Gigabyte once again because I build with Gigabyte often. Pretty much all of my systems have Gigabyte motherboards and always have done. I trust them, I'm familiar with them, and I just like them. So That's the decision behind this board. And some of you may be wondering why I haven't gone with a previous gen board. I could have saved about a tenner buying brand new if I went with a previous generation board, but most of those boards out of the box need a BIOS update to work with the Kaby Lake CPU, and I did not have an older CPU to put in the board to update the BIOS, so I decided to just go all out and get the full brand new platform in one, which is great. So there's the CPU, there's the board. I think they're going to make a great match. Next up, in the tree of importance, we have the memory. So this was a tough decision for me, it really was. On the original spec sheet that I sent my sister, I had two 4GB sticks, and I don't have two 4GB sticks here. I've gone with one 8GB stick. Now hopefully she'll be okay with that. Basically, I originally spec'd two 4GB sticks because I wanted 8 gigs of RAM in the system. I was certain of that. I definitely wanted 8. 16 is overkill, 4 isn't enough. I wanted 8. So that was plain and simple. I spec'd out two 4GB sticks because obviously then with 2 sticks you can run your memory in dual channel, so you're getting the most from it. But when I started looking at motherboards and I realised that the board I'd have to settle with only had 2 RAM slots, I then started thinking about the memory again. If I was to put two 4GB sticks in this system, I'd have 8GB with no upgrade path in the future. You'd have to take RAM out to put more RAM in, so it would be more expensive to upgrade in the future. So I decided, and I think this is the right decision, I decided to sacrifice dual channel memory, and I went with one 8GB stick. That saved me about £6, I believe. This is just crucial DDR4 2133 MHz, which is nice. My first build with DDR4, by the way. But we've sacrificed dual channel operation, but it does leave one slot free for another 8GB stick in the future. So the way I see it is this board will support the i5s and i7s and whatnot, and it'll support another 8GB stick of RAM. So say for instance 4 or 5 years down the line, if they're still really happy with their PC but they want a bit more speed, I can go on eBay and I can get a used i5, I can get a used Kaby Lake i5, and I can get another stick of RAM, another 8GB stick, and you know, upgrade drives or whatever, and they've got a nice upgrade path there. But yeah, I think this is going to be fine. Hopefully I've made the right decision, but only time will tell. So moving on to drives, this is an interesting story. I wanted an SSD. In my eyes, an SSD is a core component these days. I would never build without one. As you guys know, I try and shove SSDs into all of my systems. I ordered a very simple little Kingston V300 120GB drive, but they sent me a HyperX Fury, which is still a lower end sort of entry level SSD, but it is a little bit speedier and it's worth about £10 to £15 more than a V300. So they sent me this and they wrote on my receipts, they crossed out the model number of the V300 and they wrote an added extra for free or something. So they must have ran out of the other model, which is fine by me. They've sent me something better. Under most circumstances, I'd be pretty annoyed that they didn't send me the model that I'd asked for, but in this case, this will do the exact same job and actually be a little better, so I'm quite pleased about that. This is 120 gig, which will be enough for OS and applications, but of course for mass storage, this is a budget build, so I couldn't push it up to 250 or 240 or 256. That had to stay at 120 gig, but that's plenty. For mass storage, we went with the classic WD Blue 1TB. This was pretty much a no-brainer. Best balance of price, performance, reliability, all of the above, and I think 1TB will be plenty. I know my sister is planning on getting an external hard drive to back these up as well, which is definitely recommended, because we don't have any kind of fail-safe storage in the box itself, so it'd be nice to have some external backup, but that should be plenty for mass storage and easily upgradable in the future if needs be, and this should be plenty speedy enough and plenty spacious enough for the OS and whatnot. So there's the storage. Moving on to the third and final drive. They wanted an optical drive, as lots of people still do these days. I noticed that a lot of builds on YouTube don't contain optical drives anymore, but the truth is, a lot of everyday users still have DVDs, and they will do for a good few years. It's going to take a good few years for optical drives to die out. So in this sort of everyday use PC build, we've put in an optical drive, and this was just the cheapest one at the time. I think that was 11 quid or something. They're just so cheap these days. So nice optical drive. We've got an OEM version of Windows. Before you start shouting at me, yes, this is a DVD. Yes, it's slower to install and more awkward because you've got to keep a DVD safe now as opposed to just keeping a serial number or product key safe. But I bought whatever the cheapest OEM version of Windows was at the time. This is Windows 10 Professional 64-bit OEM, brand new, for 21 quid. Or was it 23 quid? Anyway, super cheap. And all of the keys were more expensive for just the key. So I was like, yeah, I'm putting a DVD drive in it, so I'll install it from a DVD. I don't care. So that's very good. Windows for under 25 quid, which is sweet. So, case. Whoops. Case is the last choice. I went with the Fractal Design Core 1100. Was going to go with the Core 1000. Didn't realise that they don't make it anymore. They make this one, which is an updated version instead, which is very cool. It looks a little sleeker. It's got USB 3.0, all that good stuff. Little M80X build. It's going to house all of this stuff wonderfully. So I just realised while editing that I completely neglected to talk about the PSU, even though it was right there staring in my face. So I'm going to talk about it now. I went for the Corsair VS350. Now, I would have loved to have gone with the CX modular series. It was probably about 20 quid more. I don't know. I managed to get this for a brilliant price online. Super cheap for a quality power supply. But a modular power supply, and the CX is a nice cheap modular power supply. It would have been really handy in the Core 1100, but this turned out to be okay. For a build with no GPU, this is a really nice little power supply, quality, very budget, but you still get your 3 years of warranty from Corsair, which is great, up to 85% efficiency apparently, which is pretty good, and of course 120mm fan, so it's not like one of those cheapo PSUs where you get the tiny little 80mm fan at the back. This is very nice and quiet, it's black, the cables are somewhat sleeved, so it looks okay in the system, and overall, pleased with my decision, and it kept the cost down while still getting a nice warranty and a reputable manufacturer of PSU. So that's why I chose the VS350. That is the build. I hope you guys like the components. I am personally very excited about them, and I think this is going to be a lovely little rock-solid PC. So for the first time ever, I always get asked about pricing in the comments, so I'm just going to talk about pricing straight away. This entire thing, including everything that I've just spoken about, was roughly 365 quid. Obviously that includes Windows and it includes an optical drive, so you can shave like 35 quid off for both of those things. But for me, I think, thinking about it, that is a solid, awesome price for such a sweet system. And that's a system that's getting you an SSD and a large capacity hard drive as well. So using all quality components, very new hardware and new hardware platform, DDR4 and a B250 motherboard and a Kaby Lake CPU. I think that's wonderful pricing, and I'm personally very pleased with the hardware that I've managed to get for that money. I did get everything as cheap as I possibly could, brand new. The two main places where I got things were Amazon and eBuyer. eBuyer this time was much cheaper on PSU, motherboard and case, whereas Amazon was cheaper on CPU, drives and memory. So it's just a case of seeing what's cheapest where at whatever time. So I've spoken about pricing. There we go. Your questions answered. For under £400, way under £400, we've got Windows and a lovely system. Pretty good. So of course we're going to start with our bare essentials here. We're going to get the motherboard prepped and then we'll move on to the case and all of the other juicy goodness. So let's dig into our board and take a closer look. I want to show you guys what you can expect from a pretty low-end B250 motherboard. So we get two SATA cables by the looks of it. One is right angle, one is straight. I'm going to have to find another SATA cable because we've got 3 drives. I thought it may come with 4 SATA cables, but that's probably me just being too hopeful. So you get 2 SATA cables. We get an I/O shield, and that is it. And then you just get the board, which is pretty amazing. How little you get these days, and then you've got your various documentation down there which we won't be using. So that is it for the motherboard box. Of course, let's take this out of its anti-static bag. I've just grounded myself on my server rack, and what I'm going to do is get my wrist strap in a bit because I'm building a system for somebody else. If if I'm doing it for someone else, I do like to behave myself and use my wrist strap, so I will be putting that on in just a second here. In fact, I'm going to do it now because now is the moment where I'm actually looking at the board. For those of you who don't believe me, there it is, there's the evidence. It is around my ankle. Always makes me laugh when people on YouTube say they've got their anti-static wrist strap around their ankle and they don't show it, because you do often think, have you really got it around your ankle? But as you guys can see, there it is. So here it is, folks. Nice little basic M80X motherboard. So a basic rundown of everything. Here we have our socket 1151, of course, Intel socket, right in the middle. We've got our 8-pin CPU power. We've got our 2 DIMM slots, and this is something for when I was talking about the memory, I was looking at a lot of boards with 4 slots, but I had to step it down a couple of notches, keep within the budget, and get a board with 2 slots. So that's okay. We've got our 24-pin power. We've got our USB 3.0 front header, which is great because this case has USB 3.0. We've got our 6 SATA ports. Nice to see 6 on here. We're going to be using 3, of course. Looking over in the PCI section, we've got 1 full-length PCIe 16X slot, this PCIe 3.0, and then we've got 2 1X slots. So that'll be great for future expansion, if needed, of course. And then pretty much rounding off the overall look, let's take a little look at the ports on the back. We have got PS2 keyboard and mouse, DVI VGA, 4 USB 3.0s, which is nice. 2 USB 2s, Gigabit Ethernet, and standard audio. As you guys can see, there's a little bit of flex in this board, a little bit more than what we're probably used to for a brand new board. This is definitely one of the more flexed ones I've seen straight out of the box. So I'm glad I've got some footage of this, just in case. I'm not sure what the tolerance is for flex on a board of this size, of this class, but it's looking a little bit smiley face to me on the side there, so that's something that I'm going to keep an eye on. Anyway, there's the board. As you guys can see, you don't get much more basic than that. It has 0 bells and whistles, but it'll get the job done nicely. And also, even on the cheap boards these days, it wasn't so long ago that if you step down to the lower end board, you'd get a very ugly looking motherboard. These days, they're pretty much all black. And as you can see, this one is very, very black. It looks super nice in the case. So there's the motherboard. Next up, we will of course unbox the CPU. Now in this build you may have noticed that there was no custom cooler in the parts list, and that is because we're going to be using the stock cooler, which I'm a little bit torn about. It would have been really nice to step up to even like an Arctic Cooling Freezer 7 Pro for 15-20 quid, but the stock cooler will do a fine job. And I haven't actually heard a stock cooler in person for a very long time, so I'm not going to judge it until I hear it. But obviously we're not going to be overclocking or anything like that. This is just a little Pentium, so yeah, the stock cooler should do us just fine. The box is fairly tricky to open for some reason, folks. So at the top we've got our CPU. Here it is, the Pentium G4560. As well as the Intel stock cooler. So let's take a little look at this guy. Aha, that's how it opens. Okay, we are learning together, folks. There we go. So as you guys can see, small little heatsink, pre-applied thermal paste on the bottom. Looks as if there's no cover over that. 4-pin header for the fan, little fan. Yeah, these are pretty small, but hopefully it'll be fine. With a fresh battery, I see no reason to delay. Let's pop our CPU in. So, let's get our little arm out of the way and lift up the socket. Wow, these sockets are getting so tiny and technical these days. Just look at all those pins, absolutely scary. Let's take a little look at our CPU. Here it is. Try and open it up on camera. Don't want people shouting at me for doing things out of frame, which is a terrible habit. So here's our little Pentium. There we go. You can sort of see a little triangle. Little triangle. We will soon find out if I break everything. Boom. So let's close her up and clamp her down. Oh man. And of course here we have our cover, which we'll keep safe in the motherboard box. So there's the CPU installed. I think next up we'll do the cooler. So cue the first time for everything installation. I've never installed an Intel stock cooler, so this is going to be fun. What I'm going to do is mount this so that the Intel logo is not upside down, because that bothers me. There's nothing to unpeel from the bottom. I think there'd be some sort of cover there, but there's not. Having a good look, there is definitely nothing there. That looks to be just the thermal compound on the bottom, so I think we can just go ahead and just pop this thing straight on, folks. I don't see any reason to delay. Let's just slam it down and see what happens. So, there we go. There we go. And a quick check on the other side to see that we're pushed through. You can see one there, 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 and there. And that is our stock cooler installed with the Intel logo facing the right way. I know that some people build by putting the fan cable as close to as possible the fan header, but it's long enough anyway. So we'll plug our fan in up there, and then we'll just sort of, I don't know, twirl it away somehow. We'll do that when the cable is in the case. We'll find the best place for it, but there's the cable out the way for now. If we twirl around and take a look at our memory, we can install our 8 gigs of RAM. Still humming and hawing about the whole dual channel thing, folks. I've been having an argument with myself about it since I ordered the parts. I just don't know. You know, an upgrade path is one thing, but then 8 gigabytes of RAM is a lot of RAM at the same time, so especially for an everyday computer. So an upgrade path to 16, maybe a little sort of too in the future to be considered now, but who knows. Let's just pop this stick in and see how we go. So I'm not 100% sure if I'm installing one stick of RAM where the best place to put it is. I'm going to go with this slot, but I can double check the manual later. It may not even mention, it may not matter, because either way it's going to be single channel, but there may be an optimal slot to put it in if you're only running one channel. So there we go, 8 gigs of DDR4 installed in this little board, and as you can see, motherboard prep on this basic little PC is done and dusted. Nice. So let's dig into the case, because we may as well start building inside of it. So this is of course the Core 1100. At first glance it looks very similar to the Core 1000, but it does look a little nicer. We've got this sort of like brushed aluminium effect on the front, which is really sleek. The USB ports are in a much nicer position. I hated them on the side of the Core 1000. Other than that, it still feels like a really solid M80X case. A quick rundown for those of you who haven't seen this case before. On the front, we got two 5¼ We've got the power button, reset button, USB 3, USB 2, microphone and headphones, little Fractal logo. I believe the front was mesh on the Core 1000, but the mesh is now just on the sides, and there's a gap at the bottom for intake because there's an included 120mm fan behind here. And in my parents' PC, that is the only case fan that I have, and it's going to be the same in this one. So completely and utterly positive pressure, because we've got no exhaust fans, so all of the dust will be caught by the filter at the front, and it should be adequate to cool this system. There's no video card, there's nothing really generating any heat. The rest of the case is just very basic. We've of course got space for a full ATX power supply, 120mm exhaust fan, 4 expansion slots for M80X, and of course the IO shield cutout. And on the sides there is nothing apart from this side. We've got a 120mm fan mount, but that doesn't have a dust filter. So let's dig in. Man, they are tight from the factory. Of course, after the first open, they become true thumb screws at that point. Really nice to see that we live in an age where they include thumb screws even with cases that are not really going to be used by enthusiasts. It just makes everyone's life a little bit easier. The kind of people that would use this case aren't going to be opening their case every day, but it's still nice to see that they include it. So on the inside, let's take a little look. Very basic on the inside. We've got no CPU cooler cutout, but we do have Of course, support for mini ITX and micro ATX motherboards. Little punch outs here to help support the PSU, which of course goes at the top. Here we have all of our front panel connectors, which are black in this case, really nice. They're not sleeved completely down. As you can see here, this one for the USB, the HD audio has got sort of a little bit of the colour showing, but that's fine. This one for USB 2, this one for USB 3, and then all of the front panel stuff like the power button and whatnot. 2 5 1/4. There's the 120mm fan that I was talking about. How do you get the filter out of this these days then? It looks like it may unscrew from the bottom. I'm hoping that it does still include a filter. Not just imagining the filter on the Core 1000. This is the drive mounting. I believe you can mount up to 3 2.5-inch drives, 2 3.5-inch drives, or one of each, I believe. Don't quote me on that. And of course, here is our accessory box. Let's take a look at what comes with this case. Surprisingly tough little bit of sellotape. In this box we have, okay, not very much. We have a bag with, it's a bit of a pointless box, a bag with exactly 1, 2, 3, is that 4 zip ties? I'm not too sure. Anyway, we've got motherboard standoffs, motherboard screws, drive screws, all the stuff that you'd need to build a system, all in the little bag, which is good. So, let's get building. So the first thing I'm going to do is get rid of these front panel cables completely out of the way for now. And to do that, I think I'm going to take out this drive thing, because it'll need to come out anyway. This is held in with thumb screws as well, but just like the case thumb screws, they are a little bit tight from the factory, so they do need a bit of persuasion at this point. There we go, so that just comes completely out, which is nice because it gives you some space to work. I'm going to put these screws safe. I don't have any handy parts trays or whatever. I should really think about investing into some things like that would make my life a lot easier. No, I don't think the front fan is filtered, folks. I don't know if it is, but I can't personally see one in there, so I guess it may not be. So there are all the cables out of the way. The next thing we're going to do, before we forget and install our motherboard, is of course the all-important I/O shield. Quick sanity check, PS2 at the top, easy. Let's pop her in. Aha, there we go, awesome. So that is lined up nicely. It's one of these sort of shiny I/O shields. Next up, motherboard standoffs. I haven't built a PC in a long time. This is extremely fun, and I've had a particularly sort of tough week of work, so this is definitely very therapeutic for me, just to chill out and put together a nice system. Just to make my own life easier with my limited SD card storage and battery, I'm going to pause the camera here while I screw these in, because I'm sure you guys don't want to watch me screw in all of these. This is one of those tiny little M-ATX boards, so she doesn't come all the way over, which is great news for us because we don't have a modular power supply, so it gives a pathway for the cabling to come down, which is perfect. So I only need these 6 standoffs. These 2 can remain free, and if I can find some small enough cable ties, maybe I can persuade a couple to go through there just to secure some of the cables next to the board, because I won't be able to stash them in the optical drive bays, because of course we're using an optical drive. So even if I was to put the optical drive in the bottom bay, I don't want to do that because it looks weird from the front, and I'm not a fan of cramming them all above the optical drive because that can put quite a lot of pressure on top of the drive, and I don't want to cause any issues with that because an optical drive is one of the features that they specifically requested, so I'm going to have to think of another place to stash the cables. But here we have the standoffs installed. As you guys can see, this motherboard is pretty tiny. It's M-ATX in height, but it, well, is not that sort of fat. So the M-ATX board that I've got in my Hackintosh is much kind of deeper this way. So of course, if I was to put my Hackintosh board in this case, it would come all the way over to here. So even though with this case the screws don't come in all separate little bags that are labelled, you get this nice clear to read layout of all of the stuff that the case comes with, so you can make sure that you're using your correct screws for your different drives and your motherboard and power supply and all that sort of thing if you're new to building and you're not too sure what screws are what. So unlike the systems I build for myself, because this is going to be transported to a completely different location, I've just given all of the standoffs a quick turn with the pliers, just, you know, it's not going to go anywhere, but just in case. It also makes life a little bit easier when unscrewing the board if I'm ever taking it out for whatever reason. So let's plop her in. Man, quite a tiny little board. Of course, these little metal tabs on the I/O shield are a little bit of a pain in the ass. So the board is in, and as you can see, it is very compact. We've got a nice lot of room to work in this case. It is looking really nice, folks, it really is. So I think what I'm going to do is pop the optical drive in and then get the PSU in. So once we get the PSU in, we're going to be a little bit cable mad for a second, but we'll soon sort that out. So the next thing on the list is figuring out how to pop off our little drive cover. So what I'm going to try and do is just sort of... That was a particularly easy one, folks. That was just a couple of tabs and it came right out. So this is plastic, but it's got that sort of brushed aluminium look to it. It does look really nice, actually. So for the drive, we went with, let's take a look at the make of this drive. I believe it's LiteOn. Yeah, this is a LiteOn 24x DVD burner, which has been the cheapest now for quite some time. LG was really cheap for a little while with their drive, their 24x burner, but LiteOn have been winning it. So let's slide that into the system. And when it's flush at the front, we are on what looks to be the second screw hole. So a quick read of the manual shows that we use thumb screws to put the optical drive in with this case, which is really nice. Although I will use a screwdriver because the holes are very close to the top of the case. A screwdriver is a lot thinner than my fat fingers. So we will put all 4 in. It comes with 8, of course, because we've got 2 5¼ inch bays. There's 1. Looking at the way this case is laid out, I think it'll be easiest to do everything bar drives first. So do drives last, because we'll have to screw in the drive plate and that will kind of block where we're going to be trying to do some cable management. So I think getting the optical drive in at the beginning is a good step because the power supply cables aren't in the way. But as for storage drives, I think if we do that last, that'll be the easiest. So 2 more screws to go into this optical drive. I've genuinely just misplaced a screw. I had it in my hand a second ago. Where on earth has that gone? Oh, not to worry, I'll just use another one. I have no idea where that just went all of a sudden. So there's our optical drive. Looks pretty clean from the front. Not bad at all, as you can see, lines up nicely. Really nice that they give you the option of where to put it in terms of forward and back, so that's all good. Now I think the next logical step for us will definitely be power supply. As I say, as soon as the drives go in, we'll have a big barrier here, so we'll leave those for now and we'll go for power supply. But first I'm going to do these, that way I can tie them up out of the way. So this is one of those moments where I pause the camera and tackle this and then show you the end result. So I just wired up the front panel connectors and I was thinking, where the heck is the reset switch wire? Couldn't find it anywhere. And then I realised that that's not a reset switch, it's a hard drive activity LED. So yeah, no reset switch. But on the plus side of things, all of our cabling is nice and neat along the bottom here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and find one of those sticky pad things and I'm going to try and put a cable tie there to keep a nice solid run up to the motherboard. As you can see, HD audio, USB 2, as well as the front panel connectors. That's power LED, power switch, and hard drive activity LED. No reset switch. USB 3 is plugged in up there, and obviously I'll have to do something with that crazy cable. And now I've just got this fan cable, and I think the only fan header on this motherboard is this one up here. I can't see another one just from looking, but I'll double check on the manual because sometimes you can mistake something for something else. So I'm double checking the manual, but pretty certain that's the only one. And the CPU wire worked out really well, just tucking behind the memory here. So I'm pretty pleased with that. I think this is going to be overall quite a clean build, but I guess we haven't put the power supply in yet, so that's something to bear in mind. So I've put one of these little sticky pads here and I've tied down those front panel connectors. I think that looks really clean. I've also used a couple of twist ties to keep all of these front panel connectors together. As you can see, most of them go down there, but one of them breaks off to the USB 3 up there. That's temporary for now, it's just to hold them in place. This fan cable is going to be a bit of a problem because yes, that is the only fan header, so that's going to be interesting. All I can do is get the power supply in here, start plugging things in, and then seeing how I can kind of try and clump together as many of the cables as possible. But this isn't going to be super clean, it really isn't. It's not going to happen with this case, but I'm pleased with this little bit. One thing I hate is all random excess front panel connector cabling in the bottom of the case. It's nice to keep this open, just in case, you never know with expansion cards and whatnot. Having said that, this board has 3 expansion ports, 3 expansion slots, sorry. So the bottom one would have to be a dual slot in order to interfere with the bottom of the case, so that's extraordinarily rare, especially considering it's a 1X slot. So yeah, it would be fine to have cables down here, but I've decided to just tidy them up nevertheless. So the next thing I think we should do is unbox the power supply so that we can get some action with that thing. Now this is pretty much the lowest end Corsair power supply, but I still trust the brand, of course, and the warranty is still really good. So I've decided to go for this one as opposed to the CX. That way we saved a little bit of cash and we're able to ensure that we can still build with an SSD within the budget. So let's take a look at what we get with this PSU. We get some documentation. We of course get our UK power cable, and we get some screws lurking underneath here. And then lastly we have the power supply itself with all of the cabling bundled up. So let's pull her out. There we go, that can go in there as well. We'll keep out the twist tie because we can use that in the build. And that is it for the power supply box. This is where stuff is going to start getting messy, guys. These cables are already all over the place. So let's just lower her down into the system, and she tucks up there nicely. I just found my missing optical drive screw, which I'm very pleased about because missing screws is one thing that really bugs me. So I now have 4 complete screws for installing a future 5¼ inch drive. So that is the PSU fully installed into the case. Let's flip her around and take a look at the damage. What a rat's nest. Okay, folks. Right then, let's have a little look at what's going on here. So, our power supply is in, and here is all of our wonderful cabling. By the looks of things, we're going to be able to hide a fair bit in this lower optical drive bay, which would be great. What I'm going to do first is pull the 24 pin around the rest of them, and I'm going to plug that in first. And my reasoning should become clear, because if I can get the fattest one out of the way, there's that into the board. There we go. I should be able to get the excess in there, kind of. And then if I do the same, yeah, that's going to need tying in, that's not a problem. If I do the same for the 8 pin, which handily is right here, yeah, that's PCIe. This one is definitely CPU, so that's okay. If we do the same for this guy, pull her around and try our best to just align everything. They're the 2 big ones out of the way, and we can then focus on the smaller ones. What, wrong way? There we go, that's clicked into place nicely. So both the 8 pin and the 24 pin can hide away up there. Very nice. And that just leaves the rest of them. So this could be pretty clean if I put some effort in. I'm going to try my best. Not bad at all, guys. I was able to cram a lot in there, and I'm still going to be able to get the slack and cram it in there and tie it back. There was a lovely PSU harness run, whatever, with just 2 SATA connectors on it, so that's ideal for my drives. I've plugged in the 2 SATA cables for the drives that came with the motherboard, and I've salvaged a random SATA cable from my drawer for the optical drive. Shame it's bright red, but what are you going to do? I think it actually looks pretty cool, all these different colour cables. This is, you know, there's no side window or anything. As long as it's neat and tidy, that's fine by me. The fan connector, I've put the fan connector up through into the optical drive spaghetti junction, and that's coming out from under there and over to the only fan header. And the front panel connectors are still the same, so this is in a state where it is now ready for drives, because if I put drives here I can then manage the rest of this around drives, and we're pretty much built, which is really exciting. So I'm going to put this to one side. Let's take a look at some drives. So I've got the screws out. I've got 4 of each for 2.5 and 3.5. They're different screws, so they're ready. I've got the bracket plate thing, and now it's just a case of digging in. Looks like we've got some sort of sticky adhesive thingy there, and we've got a HyperX sticker. That's pretty cool. So we'll put those over there for now. Don't need either of those. So there's our SSD, and for our hard drive, do I have scissors? These will do. We of course just have a standard WD Caviar blue 1 terabyte there in all of its glory. So how do we mount onto this thing? So I think this thing goes into the case this way, so the drives go on it that way, and I guess it would make sense for the 3.5 inch to be on the bottom because it's heaviest, and then the 2.5 inch to be on the top, and they just sit there. So let's mount the 3.5 inch first, and then we'll figure out the SSD mounting. I think that is correct. That way it sits on the rubber to obviously dampen the vibration. So I think we're on the right track here, folks. One thing I really like about this, as opposed to some toolless drive cages or whatnot, is at least when you screw them to this thing, the drives are going absolutely nowhere. Even with those sort of toolless cases and stuff, I am definitely one of those people that puts as many screws in as possible. The way I see it is, you're building a system. It's unlikely that you're going to rebuild it for whatever reason anytime soon, so you may as well just put all of the screws in and have it as stable as possible. Have everything held in there just nicely. Now then, the question that I have is, with this little 2.5 inch one, do I have to take off the rubber or not? So I think that's right, guys. I just can't remember from last time, to tell you the truth, but I think that's correct. And yeah, let's just try and slot it into the case and see how it goes. So I should be able to just take this drive assembly and slide it into place. Aha, so I have mounted it incorrectly. That is not right. They are backwards, I believe. Well, that was a little bit different to how I remembered it on the Core 1000. For starters, I swear I had the connectors this side, but I seem to have ended up with the connectors this side. But that's actually pretty cool because they're completely out of the way, and even though it was a bit of a tight squeeze, they're really tucked in there. And I don't think they're going to interfere with the door or anything, so I actually really like them that way. I've got the SATA cables coming up underneath the fan, and then the power coming from the top. And the power cable only had 2 SATA connectors on it, so there's no excess. So it actually looks really clean, that side. Got a bit of tidying up to do around here, but yeah, overall, that went pretty well. I mean, I like this because it uses screws. That's why I like it. But all things considered, I would love just a normal slide the drive-in mounting system. You know, this is cool, the way you can have 3 SSDs up along the bracket and whatnot, but it gets a bit limiting because if you put a 3.5-inch drive in, you can only put one 2.5-inch drive in, so it loses a little bit of its sort of coolness when you do that. And it would just be much easier if you could just slide them in, but it's a cost-saving thing. This little bit of metal is really cheap to produce, but I would probably pay a £5 or more for this case. For just a little, just up here. It doesn't have to be down here conflicting with the long graphics card support of the case or conflicting with the fan. Just, you could get a really nice 3-drive mount system up here under the optical drive. Just slide them in. But yeah, this thing is okay. So before we go any further with tying down cables and making things a little neater inside the case, although there's not going to be a lot we can do, but before we do any of that, let's just fire up the system. Check that I'm on the correct input, DVI. Let's flick this power switch and give her a go. Very good sign. It's burst into life. And do we get any video? Ah. Little reboot. Something's happening, folks. And she's powered down again. Okay, she's posted this time. Lovely. Big cock up from me there, folks. Big cock up. We've got a signal to the monitor. There we go. Awesome. Yeah, I didn't seat the RAM all the way. What a twat. You probably saw that earlier on in the video. Should have really checked that. But yes, the RAM is now seated. I think I did that with the system before. I should really bloody check. Anyway, we haven't damaged anything. We're booted up. So let's just quickly jump into the BIOS. One thing that may sound strange to you guys, but it's definitely something that I enjoy. And that is when you boot up a new system, when you turn on a brand new build for the first time, I love hearing the noise that it makes, because every PC is different. The combination of PSU fan, CPU fan, drives and case fans, that is always different, and they are the things that make noises. So every PC has its own little noise, and this one, it's sounding quite quiet. The case fan is spinning and it's really quiet. The only thing that's really making a noise is the Intel heatsink. But I'm just going to have a little nose around the BIOS, which, by the way, has a very nice interface. Very, very nice. I should say UEFI, really. I should get with the times and stop saying BIOS. But yeah, just going to give everything a little check. You can see our CPU is running at 3.5 gigahertz, and our RAM is running at 2133 megahertz, which is all correct. And everything seems to be absolutely fine. So that concludes the build, but don't worry, the video is not over. We've got to tidy up the cables, we've got to install Windows, but right now I'm going to have a little break. This has been extremely fun. It's been a really nice change for me to fiddle around with some hardware. Super pleased that the machine has booted up, and just looking at it, even though I haven't tidied things up yet, it is a very, very nice looking system. I think this is going to be a really sexy little build for a nice everyday use PC. So folks, it's time to install Windows. I've got the Windows disk. Let's just power on the system and pop her into place. This will be a good test for the optical drive as well, because we know if this installs, we're on to a winner. Look at that, lightning quick. Lightning quick. Just popped right up. Even though this is from an optical disc, I'm still expecting it to install pretty quickly on the SSD. So by default it was all set to United Kingdom, which is cool. Install. Setup is starting. This optical drive is so loud with the side covers off. Hopefully it'll be quite a bit quieter when they're on. It's like a jet. Aha, okay, so product key time. So it took the product key, which is really good. I'm not connected to network at the moment, but it took the product key, and both of my drives are showing up. You can see the 1 terabyte and also the 120 gig. So obviously that's the SSD. So very pleased about that. Okay folks, we are up and running, and I've been clicking around for about 20 minutes just sorting a few things out. So one of the main things that I've done, which I wanted to do in preparation on this PC, was I've moved all of the sort of storage intensive folders to the hard drive. So if we go in here, this is now the location of these folders. Documents, downloads, music, pictures and videos. So all of these folders on the system now, well, not desktop, that's still on the SSD, but all of these folders are located on the drive, which is exactly how it should be when you've got an SSD and a hard drive, because it makes backup so much easier. It's just the best way to do it, in my opinion anyway. Obviously that's that comes down to opinion for everyone, but it makes life a lot easier because your folders are all organized and it automatically goes on to the storage drive. So unless you store millions of things on your desktop, then you're not going to run into many issues. Other than that, the system has been extremely. Sorry folks, ironically I ran out of space on my SD card while talking about storage. But anyway, the system is, what was I saying? Yeah, I think I was just saying that the system feels generally really smooth. I've got to finalise a few drivers and whatnot, but I'm not going to go through that today. I'm going to sort of finish this off tomorrow. But I just want to report that it does see the 8 gigs of RAM and the Pentium G4560 3.5 gigahertz. So it's all looking really healthy. So I'm going to call it a day today. I'm going to have a chill out. It's currently 8:30 in the evening, so this has been great fun to do today. I'm just going to leave the system do its thing, do its updates and whatnot, and I'm going to go and chill out, and then we'll finish this off tomorrow. We've just got very minor things left to do within Windows, so and just tying back some cables and stuff tomorrow, so very minor work. Okay folks, it is the next day, and the reason the system is off is because I want to show you guys how quickly this thing boots up. Windows 10 is phenomenal. This is one thing that really blows my socks off about Windows 10, is how quickly it can boot up. So check this out. I'm going to push the power button in 3, 2, 1 now. And this is just shocking. Now I've got a Windows 10 system, but it's on a much older platform. My PC is a Sandy Bridge platform. So because of that, I'm running a Beta UEFI, meaning that, check that out. Man, and the PC is ready to use straight away. It's responsive straight away. Just, that's so awesome. Yeah, my PC is running on a Beta UEFI, and it goes through a few more processes during boot up, so it's nowhere near as quick as that. And that's just lightning. I think the combination of Windows 10, brand new SSD, brand spanking new platform, everything is just really speedy. So I'm very happy, very happy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a start on editing this video, and while I'm doing that, I'm just going to run a few tests on the system, make sure it's nice and stable, and just go from there really. And once I'm sure that everything is tip-top, I can tie all of these cables back. I don't think there's much more that I'll be able to do, but I'll give it my best shot just to make it look a little neater in this little region of the case, and then we are pretty much ready to rock and roll. So while I start my editing, I wanted to leave the system on a non-synthetic but definitely sort of heavy workload, just to leave it sitting here crunching some numbers. So what I decided to do was open up 4 1080p YouTube videos. I just typed in 10-hour 1080p, and that way I got, you know, fireworks and fireplace and waves and things, all 1080p, playing all at once, just to push up the CPU, not cramming the CPU up to 100% obviously, but just rocking at, you know, 70-80%, so the system is sitting here doing something, just to, you know, check a little bit of stability and check that it's still chugging along when I come back in half an hour's time or whatever. Here it is folks, the finished cable managed system. I think it looks pretty damn good, so let me talk you through some of the changes that I've made. So for starters, our 8-pin power and fan header 3-pin fan connector are cable tied back here, and they disappear up there into that area where I've put all of the excess cabling, so that looks much tidier. The 24-pin is tied up here nicely, and the slack is underneath the optical drive bay. It's actually coming round under there and back up to the PSU, so it's not too crammed underneath the drive. A couple of other changes. Obviously this was in place already, I've already described this. This is got to be the neatest part, which I'm really pleased with, but I've also tied down the SATA cables together, and they're tied up with the other loose power cable that was here. I've routed the optical drive SATA cable behind the bundle, and it just pokes up there. The USB 3 cable, I'm quite proud of that, because that, along with the rest of the front panel connectors, are very nicely routed up here. As you can see, they all come from here, and then the 3.0 joins it here, and they loop up and around and into the front of the case, leaving the pathway for the fan completely clear. As you guys know, it was looping in front of that drive, so that is now clear. I've used the spare motherboard standoff hole to put a twist tie through it, and then I've just taped the excess of the twist tie back here. So I think that is super clean. The power cable here and the SATA cable is the only sort of restriction in this area, so that's pretty much nothing. I've got excess SATA cable down there for the bottom drive, and then pretty tight one for the top drive, so there's not lots I can do with that, so I've decided to just tie them together to stop them moving around too much. And other than that, that is the cabling complete. And considering it's not a modular power supply, I am really pleased with how clean this has turned out. It's not a modular power supply, and there's no room behind the motherboard tray, and there's no cable routing holes, and there's no cable routing loops. So I think, judging by all of that, it's pretty damn clean, and I am very pleased with the system. So I'm going to stick the side panels on, and we're going to give it a final test. I need to do some installation and whatnot, but as for this video, we'll stick the panels on, give it a test, and then we'll call it a day. So here we are, panels on, and it is the final test, because obviously I had to unplug a couple of things to do the cable management, but it looks like we are all good to go. Excellent. Sorted, folks. And in case any of you are wondering, this is what the front looks like with the power LED. Very nice behind the power button there, and the drive activity LED in a sort of like whitish purple colour. So that's very nice. And this basically concludes the video. That is a wonderful, at least in my opinion, a wonderful little everyday use home, family, office PC, which can chew through pretty much anything, I think. It's got a lovely beefy CPU in it. I'm going to be doing a little bit more testing in the week, because it's going to be about 3 or 4 days until I have to hand this over. So I'm going to do a few installations and a few more tweaks, but for the most part, this thing is sorted. So thank you so much for watching this epically long video, building a very simple PC, but it was great fun to make. I hope I can do more builds really soon in the future. They are some of the most fun I ever have on the channel. It's just so nice getting a load of brand new parts and sticking them together and making something really cool. So thank you very much for watching, everyone. If you have any questions at all, please leave them in the comments and let me know what you think of the system. Let me know what you guys are up to with your custom PC building lately. I'm always happy to have a little bit of a chat in the comments. And as always, folks, I will see you in the next video.